The French say to save Paris is to save France. What about America? To understand America, you have to understand Washington. But today, Washington, D.C. is in the midst of a violent tremor. White House layoffs, a federal workforce overhaul, and budget freezes, the very heart of American power is being reshuffled. Are the crowds of tourists outside the White House as large as they used to be? After the massive federal layoffs, are the surrounding residential communities still thriving? And what about those neighborhoods that Uber drivers warn you to avoid at night? Is it really that dangerous? What would we see if we went during the day? Welcome to our American Cities series, Washington, D.C. Are you okay? On previous trips to D.C., I always stayed with a professor whose wife used to work at the Department of Commerce. But this time I wanted to explore on my own. The biggest difference I noticed right away was the traffic. The roads were no longer congested, and there were fewer pedestrians. I used to drive this same route, and the traffic was as bad as New York City. But this time it was smooth sailing. After checking into my hotel, I took a walk around the neighborhood, which is relatively close to the White House and the Lincoln Memorial. In the past, this area would have been swarming with tourists. But this time, the streets were noticeably empty. The bus stop, which used to have a line of people, was deserted. In that moment, I felt like the whole rhythm of Washington had slowed down. Of course, the sun was still shining, the breeze was gentle, but the city's personality felt different from my memories. To make sure I wasn't just being subjective, I went to a fast food place that I visit every time I'm in DC to check the crowd. This time, there wasn't a single person in line at the entrance. The city of Washington has truly changed. It has suddenly become quiet. A slower pace and fewer people might not be a good thing for local businesses that rely on crowds. Are they longing for the bustling capital of the past, or are they perhaps looking forward to a new way of life in America's capital? To find out, I decided to explore the city using my favorite new mode of transport. In the past, I've always explored DC by car. This time, I decided to experience the city in a new way, on a shared electric bike. It was an experience I'd never had on my previous visits, and it was incredibly convenient. There are bike share stations everywhere. So, for the next few minutes, please relax and join me for an electric bike tour of DC. I have to admit, I was a little nervous at first. I wasn't used to the bike, and I was trying to follow the rules, which said not to ride on the sidewalk. But I quickly realized I was the only one pushing my bike on the sidewalk like an idiot while everyone else was zipping past me. I found that switching between walking and riding was the perfect way to see the city. You can ride through the quiet, elegant streets, but when you come across an interesting sculpture or a charming little plaza, you can hop off and explore on foot. It gives you a slow view perspective without getting tired. I highly recommend it. As I got closer to the White House, I didn't need GPS. The telltale sign was the increasing level of security, iron barricades, and a growing number of police cars. You know you're headed in the right direction. I always make a point to visit the area around the White House, not to see the building itself, but to see the protests. The themes are different every time. It's like a fashion show in Paris. There's always something you never expected. To be honest, the White House itself never feels particularly new or exciting. What's truly fascinating is the scene outside. The kaleidoscope of protests, the petitions, the handmade signs, and the people from all over the world who gather here. Taking a picture with the mounted police is an especially popular attraction. This time, it was drizzling, and you could see maintenance workers in the rain, tending to the historic building. Many of the core buildings in Washington today are not the originals from the nation's founding. After the British burned the city down in 1814, it was rebuilt from the ashes. The city was meticulously planned, with all the major avenues pointing toward the central axis of power, the White House, the Capitol, the Treasury, and the Federal Reserve. But what makes Washington different from other world capitals is the way the secular world and the center of power coexist. Just a stone's throw from the White House, you'll find a row of humble food trucks, their warm lights glowing in the rain. It's a scene you would rarely find in the heart of another capital, and it reveals a side of Washington's character. Even in its most solemn center of power, there is a place for the warmth and grit of everyday life. Riding from the White House to the Lincoln Memorial, you feel the city's powerful sense of order and its centripetal force. But have you ever wondered, where do all the civil servants who work in these buildings go after work? And how have the government layoffs affected their lives? There's a neighborhood right next to Capitol Hill that is, for all intents and purposes, the residential community for federal employees, a White House family housing area, so to speak. Years ago, the TV show House of Cards famously depicted the ruthless politics of this neighborhood with its iconic red brick townhouses. But in reality, the community is much less cruel and far more filled with a love for life. Every house has a meticulously manicured garden, with flowers and shrubs neatly trimmed. Historically, this area was a working-class neighborhood for artisans. But as the government grew, the land east of the Capitol became prime real estate. High-level officials moved in for the convenient commute, just a 10-minute walk to the office. Over the decades, the neighborhood gentrified completely, and you can no longer see any trace of its working-class roots. I chatted with a local who was out walking his dog and asked him about the impact of the federal layoffs. He said that while homes are staying on the market a bit longer, the core neighborhood hasn't been hit too hard. The layoffs have primarily affected the lower-level civil servants who commute from the suburbs. The high-level officials and government consultants who live in the wealthy D.C. neighborhoods or Virginia's upscale suburbs remain largely unaffected. And as for Capitol Hill, the housing is so expensive that young civil servants can't afford to live here anyway. They've all moved out to the suburbs in Maryland. It seems that unlike in other cities where housing prices are tied to the economy, in Washington they are tied to politics. To get a real taste of local life, I asked around and found the most popular coffee shop in the neighborhood, Wine and Butter. It's tucked away in a semi-basement corner, but the aroma of coffee is irresistible. I much prefer these small local spots to the global chains like Starbucks. They have a human touch. The walls are covered with little notes from neighbors, posters for local exhibitions, lost cat flyers. This is what a coffee shop was originally meant to be. It's more like a community convenience store. Since I was there, I had to try their freshly baked bread. The shop is small, so they've turned the front yard into a charming outdoor seating area. The little landscape details aren't fancy, but they are clearly arranged with a lot of care and heart. As I sat there, I thought that if I lived in this neighborhood, I would be a regular here every single day. I chatted with some of the locals and learned about another neighborhood institution, a 150-year-old market called Eastern Market. A market that old must have stories from their grandfathers' grandfathers. The air inside was a familiar mix of fruits, meats, spices, and cheeses, the scent of real life. I was happy to see they also had a variety of prepared foods like homemade chicken soup and hand-wrapped shumai. The friendly vendor told me his parents had started the shop, and now his generation was getting ready to retire. For the locals, this market is more than just a place to buy groceries. It's the connective tissue of their community. You might be wondering if a trip to Washington is just about old stories and historic buildings. Is there any modern development? Absolutely. Now, let's go see a new face of Washington that few people ever share. Right next to the historic Anacostia River is a modern master-planned architectural complex, the Navy Yard. As the name suggests, this was once a naval base, dating back to the early 1800s. After the old factories were abandoned, the area became a persistent problem for the city. But starting in the 2000s, a 20-year redevelopment project transformed this waterfront area. Because of its prime location next to Capitol Hill, it has attracted a wave of modern commercial and residential development. The new development pays homage to its past, preserving many of the old factory buildings and repurposing them for commercial use. This model of adaptive reuse has been very successful and has become a template for the revitalization of many old cities across America. The government provides the infrastructure and tax incentives, and private developers bring in modern designs and community management. Here in the Navy Yard, You can see historic industrial structures standing right next to brand new buildings, creating a fascinating urban landscape that is full of youthful energy. Of course, this new neighborhood is not cheap. I asked a local leasing company, and a one-bedroom apartment here rents for over $4,000 a month. The people who can afford to live here are mostly working in the tech startups and consulting firms that have moved into the area to be close to the capital's network of contacts. This new Washington, with its waterfront parks filled with young people, is a world away from the stern and formal image of the old White House and Capitol. But just a short trip south across the river reveals another side of Washington. In the morning, my Uber driver told me he wouldn't go to that side of the river at night. If it's not safe at night, I wanted to see what it was like during the day. Across the river from the glittering new developments is Anacostia, one of Washington's oldest residential neighborhoods, now known as a predominantly African American community. In the mid-19th century, it was a white middle-class suburb. But in the mid-20th century, as the city of Washington expanded its subway system, many black families were displaced and relocated here. Anacostia feels like a world apart from the rest of Washington. The streets are lined with local check cashing and bill paying services, a sign that many residents operate outside the mainstream banking system. The buildings are not as grand as those across the river, but you can still find heartwarming details, like a Be Kind little free library on the street corner. I noticed many for sale signs in front of the houses. With land prices so much cheaper here, developers have started to scout the area, perhaps hoping to replicate the success of the Navy Yard. But redeveloping this neighborhood will be a challenge because it has a strong, deeply rooted local culture that can't be easily erased by money. A perfect example is a local landmark called the Big Chair. It was originally created in 1959 as an advertising gimmick by a local furniture company. Decades later, even as the neighborhood's demographics have changed, this giant chair has remained a beloved spiritual landmark. The community's artistic spirit is visible everywhere, especially in the huge murals on the sides of buildings, many of which feature powerful portraits of black women. At a bus stop next to one of these murals, I started chatting with two young girls. When I told them I was visiting from California, they insisted on taking me to their favorite local coffee shop. The shop was called Capital One, and it was a unique hybrid of a bank, a coffee shop, and a community study space. As I sat there, I looked in the mirror and saw a message written on it. Your future will not only be better, it will be wealthier. It made me think of the Uber driver's warning. By coming here during the day, I was able to see the city's complexity. The story of Washington has never belonged only to the White House and the Capitol. It belongs to all of its communities. I want to thank my friends on the East Coast who hosted me on this trip. I wish you all the best, and I look forward to seeing you again in DC in 3 years.